our guest is Aneesh Chopra, who's the first CTO of the United States, which is quite an honor. He was appointed by President Obama, and he has written a book called Innovation State. And my first question, of course, is what motivated you to write this book? Like, why did you feel the need to get it out?
Well, first, I have a sense of hope for the country that may not be the current refrain about Washington looking a bit dysfunctional. I have a sense of hope that we're going to solve the biggest challenges of our generation, and we're going to do it this decade. I also wanted to take a step back and look historically. Have we had a pioneering government? Has government been at pace with the private sector and the incorporation of new techniques, new technologies, new approaches to managing and operating on work? And then last but not least, I had accumulated a set of techniques during my service to the president, what I call an open innovators toolkit, that I thought, if more widely understood, might help to arm up a generation of entrepreneurs and innovators, whether you are inside the government or outside the government, but looking to find ways to join in this cause to solve problems. So the book is all three: communicating a sense of hope, putting it in historical context that we've been here before, and then last but not least, a set of news you can use, ideas that can help to bring about this more innovative state.
I'm glad you're an optimist. I'm glad there's some optimists out there. I'd like to say I'm an optimist as well. Do you think things are trending more recently more negatively? I mean, given things like Snowden and how that's impacting the idea of open data for government, is that a real challenge right now?
The great news is that in the wake of Snowden, you saw the political system take a step back and say, what is the right role of government on the issue of data and privacy? And here's where it's actually a positive, if you want to spin a positive off of what obviously is a difficult circumstance. The president's team just released a big data and privacy report that outlined a model for how information should flow in the internet economy. And that model starts with the premise that individuals are entitled to electronic copies of their own data. Now, the reason why that's important is it's actually creating more data liquidity in the regulated sectors of the economy. So if you're a student and you have your data in the student information system at a college or a K-12 school, you're entitled to an electronic copy, machine readable, of that data that you might want to then share with someone who can build a personalized tutoring service for you. Today, you really can't get an electronic copy of that data. You get a transcript, basically, and that's what you get. Or your doctor. You could say to your doctor, I'd like an electronic copy of my medical data so that I might have a digital tutor that might help me navigate, if you will, the healthcare system to figure out what I should be doing that I'm not so that I can stay healthier. So I think you're seeing the negative into a positive, asserting a new framework. I own the data, and I want the ability to share it, especially data held in the government. Yeah. Even the IRS, by the way, now allows every American to download a machine-readable copy of their filing so that if they want to go shop around for a new filing support service, they can now take their data with them to do so.
I mean, if you think about it, it's before, like, we had blue buttons and red buttons. People didn't know if people even wanted this data. And so you put it out there, and now we kind of assume it should be out there, we should need it, we want to get access to it. What's the next forefront? Like, what's the next sort of breakthrough on open data? And the reason why I ask, I feel like there's a certain amount of, expectations are always going higher and higher and faster. Are we actually outstripping those expectations? Are we able to fulfill on that promise?
So I have a colleague of mine, Sanju Bansal, who has long stated that the value, true value, it occurs at the intersection of multiple disciplines. And if you take that into the context of data, it's not just the collection of data that's useful, it's the ability to mash up data from perhaps government sources with private sources. And that really is very early days. So you could imagine, for example, a veteran who's got a profile, say on LinkedIn or Monster or any one of the other companies where they've got their profile, and they could combine what they self-entered as their profile with the official transcript of all the skills they acquired in the military. We blue-buttoned a version of what's called the DD-214. So any veteran can now download a soft copy of their military transcript. Imagine combining that with one of these social profiles or Google+, and what I could do is unlock all kinds of opportunities to connect to people who will help me find a job, pick a college or a university that's right for me, but it's at that intersection. So I think the next chapter is going to be entrepreneurs and innovators who are mashing up data sets in health, energy, even education markets, as we've just described, in new and creative ways to add value.
Have you been surprised by the pace of, or lack thereof, actually, of the startups in the space? I mean, there was this hope that all this open data be created, and these startups would come out there and make all these cool ideas and make like your own DMV app or whatever it is, the equivalent of that stuff. Has that been slower or faster than you expected? Is it now, do you see it turning the corner?
So I would say slow and fast with an asterisk. Fast in healthcare, slow out of healthcare. And the reason for that is my successor. Todd Park came out of the Department of Health and Human Services, and he had a very interesting insight. Opening up data is the equivalent of a tree falling in the woods. It doesn't necessarily mean people know about it. And so the key had been to reach out to the community to inform people that all of this information is now available. So in healthcare, there's actually now an ecosystem. Thousands of people gather every year at an initiative he called Health Data Palooza, where now 4 or 5 years running, McKinsey has estimated this is over 200 new products and services have been born on account of the fact that people, many of these data sets were publicly available. It's not like they were hidden from view. It's just now they're organized in an easier to find manner, and there's a proactive system in place to go inform people about it. I also put an asterisk in healthcare because you have to operate in a revenue model or a business model that makes sense for you. In healthcare today, we are changing the underlying incentives to reward people who stay healthy versus rewarding doctors and hospitals who treat you when you're sick. In that transition, there's now a premium on understanding or predicting someone before they get really sick, because it's cheaper to treat them when they're only slightly sick or even before they're sick. So there's now a market incentive to develop products and services born on this more population health database. And that business condition, in addition to the fact that people now know about the data, now they can make money off the data, that's why health is really scaling as a place for open data innovation. We're starting to see that begin to emerge. There are new business models in education, slow, but competency-based learning models getting accreditation and the ability to get reimbursed is going to create more opportunity for learning technologies, as well as energy efficiency. States like California that have proactive policies that reward their utility to help folks save money on their energy bill will encourage them to open up the data and create apps. And so you're seeing that where the business models are in place and people are aware, it's actually scaling it at a pretty good clip.
What can Google do to help kind of foster that ecosystem as a partner to the government?
Well, I was sharing the story, Google's already done it. And I want to just make sure folks know the story because it's an important one to realize how we can all play a role. The whole point of Innovative State is that every one of us can contribute as a unit within Google or a company or as individuals. And I shared this story, and I'll share it briefly if it's okay. The president handed me an assignment. It was August of 2011. He had just given a speech or was preparing to give a speech announcing a challenge to the private sector. Please hire the 100,000 plus veterans who are coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan, and that this was going to grow over the coming years, and we wanted more and more companies to make an explicit veteran hiring commitment. And we had a data problem, which is how will a veteran know which employers made this commitment? Is there going to be one website, www.findveteran-friendlyemployers.gov? Who would maintain it? Where would that be built? Or I called Vint Cerf, who is a friend and a mentor, and I said, Vint, I'd love to find a creative approach to this problem because I'm not sure I'm thinking about it the right way. And his immediate reaction was, you have to talk to Guha, who is one of the fellows here at Google, one of the smartest folks I've had the pleasure of knowing. And he told me this is a search problem, not a database problem. And that what we could do is get the ecosystem to standardize a very simple piece of metadata that says if you're an employer and you have a job posting and you want to make it clear that you want to offer a veteran hiring commitment, add this little bit of metadata to your job posting page, And we can crawl the internet and find all job postings associated with a veteran hiring commitment. It took 30 days to get the schema.org community to embrace this standard. And it took another 30 days to get folks to commit to adopt the standard. But within 90 days of the president's speech, we were in the Rose Garden at the White House announcing that Google, LinkedIn, Monster, a variety of other stakeholders voluntarily pledged to make this service available. And today, literally millions of job postings associated with those employer hiring commitments are now discoverable through this collaborative. So what I mean by that is, it's I think of life in threes: light, medium, and heavy. The light is when you have spare time and you want to commit to a problem, visit challenge.gov and see if you or a group of your friends and teammates might bring creative ideas to a problem that's now been organized in a structured way by the government. So think about contributing or participating in challenge.gov. Medium is actually thinking about a problem that motivates you and figure out what can I do if I were to ask for data that's not today available, or find ways to tap into other aspects of this, whether it be data standards or prizes and challenges, and find a way to build my project that is something that I want the world to have, powered in part by open data, open government. Or three, heavy, I wouldn't say leave Google, but take a sabbatical. We encourage folks to sign up as Presidential Innovation Fellows. We're disciples of Eric Ries's lean startup methodology, and every year now we have dozens of entrepreneurs coming into Washington to spend 6 months or a year really scrubbing in with entrepreneurs inside government to go after well-defined problems that the agency leadership has said we really want your brain power to help solve. And we just closed the round of the current batch of presidential fellows, but we'll have more opportunity. And so think about actually dedicating some time would be my third option. Light, medium, heavy.
That's great. So one question about technology outside of government and innovation outside of government, what the role government can play in that. You talk about the narrative you're trying to change, which is not about big or small, it's about just being smarter, which sounds very noble. I hope we can do that. But I guess one question is, when government tries to spark innovation outside in certain sectors through prizes or challenges or whatever, and it takes on risk that the market is unwilling to take on, but it seems very unwilling to accept those risks when they sometimes fail. I mean, we have a venture capital group within Google, and so we know sometimes we'll win, sometimes they'll fail, and we accept that. But how does government, with accountability and so forth, and with a pluralist society, deal with that kind of outcome sometimes?
So let me start with a framework. Yeah. In the first year of the Obama administration, he unveiled the Strategy for American Innovation, whitehouse.gov/innovation, if any of you want to read it. And it articulates the role of government to foster innovation in society. And it starts at the foundation of our society, which is we typically see government play a role investing in infrastructure. And what we suggested in this particular strategy is that roadways, railways, and runways were the infrastructure of the 20th century economy, and that digital is in many ways an important part of our infrastructure in the 21st. So whatever we can do to make it easier and better to build up our digital infrastructure. The good news is that's bipartisan. We had a national wireless initiative opening up airwaves for more commercial services for broadband and opening up government spectrum for commercial use is an example where both sides of the aisle came together and said, let's do this. We're also using that program to help build a next generation capability for cops and firefighters and emergency services professionals to better communicate. The last recommendation of the 9/11 Commission to allow for interoperable communications. So get infrastructure right. Second, we need rules of the road. So what are the rules of the road on privacy and security to maximize the opportunity for at least the digital side of the innovation economy? And again, we embrace the framework of collaboration, enforceable codes of conduct. So we've invited stakeholders to think about ways to honor, for example, the Do Not Track flag, which was not maybe the most successful program was launched, but at least it was an enabling a part of the policy ledger so we could get more privacy protection in the existing economy. But last but certainly not least, we said there are a few sectors where government needs to play at least a convening role and maybe an investing role to catalyze breakthroughs in health, energy, and education. And here, I wrote in the book, I borrowed heavily from models in the private sector for what we would call innovation pipeline management. There's actually a science to bringing new ideas to life. You just don't want experimentation, throw some money here, see if it works or doesn't. There's a methodology. And some organizations are good about it and some are not. And I write in the book about the negative case study of Kodak, which was particularly awkward for me because here I am growing up in an era where Kodak is sort of second to none, the most innovative company in the world, invented the VCR, invented digital photography, commercialized neither of them because management chose not to invest in these opportunities. They had a breakdown in their innovation management pipeline. And what was particularly awkward for us is that First Lady invited Mike Krieger, the co-founder of Instagram, a Brazilian immigrant, to her box. And as you know, the year Instagram gets acquired for some ungodly sum of money, $1 billion, whatever it is, by Facebook, is the year Kodak declares bankruptcy, and largely on account of their management failure to innovate. So my suggestion was that we create the capacity for innovation management in the same way. So even if we take a risk, it's understood and managed. We have, for example, now in statute, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation in the Affordable Care Act, instantiating the authority to experiment with new ways to pay doctors and hospitals to keep people healthy. Not every idea that the Innovation Center will launch will be successful, but it's designed into its DNA, and there's actually a backstop. If they can prove that their payment reforms improved quality and lowered cost, then the actuary of the department, who's not political, can certify it met those conditions. Now it can be a payment model that's available to all doctors and hospitals without having to go back to Congress. Innovation pipeline management, an important aspect of this. And I think you're going to see some of that even with ARPA-E in education, in energy, and we called for an ARPA-Ed in education, similar principles to DARPA, which offers this kind of innovation pipeline work for the Defense Department.
You know, that works at Google.
And all of the DARPA-funded projects are all employees at Google.
Exactly. Well, great. We're going to open this up to questions from the audience in a few minutes. So if you have any questions or thinking about them. One question I had to ask, you allude to a little bit in the book because it's still hot in the press, which is healthcare.gov.
Yes.
And so I want to get your opinion about what went wrong. And this is more of a question about the operations of government's IT infrastructure and how it works. What do you think went wrong and from your perspective now and how we dealt with the problem and how we prevent that kind of thing from happening again?
Yeah, this is unbelievably frustrating, right? As an American, as someone who has been a fan of President Obama's, I, like everyone, we were sort of shocked that, you know, despite all the successes politically, the Supreme Court, that how could literally a website be the demise, if you will, of the program. My early read was that procurement remains a significant problem in government. Everyone in this room, if they wanted to participate in government as an individual, they could volunteer their time. Like GUHA, they could actually help design a public-private collaborative. But the minute money's involved, if someone wants to get paid for that work, which is inevitable, you want to get paid for work, then it triggers a whole machine called the Federal Acquisition Regulations. And it's become so broken in Washington, the Defense Department wrote a memo and said, we almost have to avoid fair and open procurements. They didn't use that language, I'm going to be careful about it, but that what happens today is if there was truly a fair and open competition, then the culture is anyone who loses immediately protests, which delays the project about a year on average. And the people who suffer are the people who want the program to go alive, not the vendors fighting over each other about who won and lost the contract. So my instinct, it hasn't been reported, and I don't know if the agency will get that level of detail out, but my instinct is one of the root cause problems is that they didn't have a truly fair and open procurement. They had to go to a list of a dozen or so pre-qualified vendors who were already allowed to do work for the government, irrespective if they had any experience building an exchange like healthcare.gov. So when you have a limited pool of people that you can tap into because of these acquisition problems, you have a bit of a recipe for problems, and then you can go into all the other aspects of testing and so forth, which are really build off of that fundamental problem. But let me flip the positive side. Healthcare.gov is one of my favorite case studies in the book as an example of an innovative state. The version that went live in July of 2010. How many of you knew that there was a version that went live in July of 2010? right? No one's hands are up on the web. I'm sure you're going to say the same. Well, one of you did. Okay, fine, one of you.
Read the book.
Read the book. Here's the point. The bill was signed into law March, I think, 9th or 10th, 2010. And the very first IT deliverable was a comprehensive catalog of all public and private health insurance options that had never been amassed before, a data set that had never been collected, let alone released. So that's a little over 90 days. We didn't have time for a procurement. My successor, Todd Park, was CTO at HHS, and we worked it out that him and my colleague, Macon Phillips, would kind of lead this startup to create healthcare.gov. Who was their lead designer? During the debate on healthcare.gov, a young man from New Jersey called Edward Mullen thought that it'd be better if he could put his design talent to work to help explain to the American people that this is what will mean for you if this law passes. And he created myhealth.gov, a nice visual experience, and he just posted a screenshot of it and tweeted at my colleague Macon at the White House. Macon sees the at mention, sees the image, and says, this is pretty good stuff. And long and short of it, we bring Ed in. He was not a government contractor, procurement, process, just a talented person passionate about the issue, ends up becoming the lead designer on healthcare.gov. They built the system with openness in mind so that when the data was made available on the website, it was also available in machine-readable form for others. To this day, the US News & World Report Health Insurance Finder is still powered by the data from that original healthcare.gov. The point is, lots of shots on goal. There should be millions of websites that give people information about their healthcare and let them find whatever path is right for them through a broker, through a website, through their neighbor, or the government directly to get the care they deserve. You will see this fall, my hope, a return to that principle, opening up of those data assets so that more and more sites can be built, not just one, to allow folks to shop. And that'll be an example of an innovative state.
So a different architecture. Do we have any questions from the audience? While you're thinking, I will add one more. So on the international front, so I'd like to think the U.S. is a leading innovation country in many ways. I don't know, are we a leading innovator in statecraft or running a country or government operations? Other places we can at least point to, like maybe ARPA-E or something like that? Or,
yeah.
But you know, in what areas are we not? And what countries do you see doing really innovative things that we should learn from and take here?
President Obama convened on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly meeting about 50 heads of state back in 2010. Well, he issued a challenge in 2010, and he began the convenings in 2011 to say, let's all do this together. Let's create an international movement of open government. And the only prerequisite for signing up was you had to pledge to commit to an open government plan that's written with your civil society, and that you got to publish that plan in an open format. And countries all over the world demonstrated their real powerful case studies. Brazil has their people participate in their budgeting process, setting priorities. One of my favorite examples actually has to do with India, and it is not IT specific. They disclosed all the folks that get paid. They had the equivalent of a works progress, WPA, a works progress administration. People get paid to do work as a way to create jobs in rural villages throughout the country. And they decided to make an open data set out of what is it that these people are paid to do. So I'm getting paid to fix the well, or open up a water fountain, or create something else in the neighborhood. So they began publishing the data sets. In villages in India, there are NGOs, nonprofits, who take it and write with chalk on a wall, literally, these are the people in our village who've been paid to do these things. And the level of accountability that created, because they know, wait a minute, he was paid to build that, but it's not built yet. What are you doing?
Or the teacher didn't show up.
Or the teacher didn't show up.
Classic.
So you have open data even without a digital interface in that case study. And you'll see others moving towards electronic voting and other ways to strengthen democracy that I think are useful to learn as case studies. And the good news is, what I try to say in this book, this is less about an ideological fight between the left and the right, even around the world. It's really about a collective capacity issue, which is if we can become more innovative in the delivery of services, let's have the debate what government should do, But once that's settled, let's do it in the most efficient and effective manner, which will inevitably involve a digital aspect in today's environment, and better to do that with the opportunity for others to co-create and build on that success. And America is leading in that co-creation, co-building aspect.
That's great. I think you give a great historical context about where we come in this process and where we're going. I think the concern would be that it may not be a bifurcated process, that you don't first decide what you want to do and then we all make the best way of doing it, because then people will try to game it. They lost the debate in the first part, so they'll undermine the actual implementation. Kind of what Healthcare.gov was a little bit happening, where basically they were happy, the other side would be happy that it was failing. Not because they want the government to fail on its own, they just didn't want us to be doing that thing.
The most depressing aspect of that for me, just to hit the point, there were 7 states early in the process that were awarded about $250 million to preload or pre-develop modules of Healthcare.gov that they pledged to make reusable by other states, this collective benefit opportunity. 2 of those states had an election in the midst of the grant cycle, where Republican leadership took over, Oklahoma and Kansas. The Oklahoma team, the staffers who wrote the proposal on what they envisioned the Oklahoma digital experience to be for shopping for healthcare, in my humble opinion, I read it. I had no hand in the selection of it after they were awarded. I went through and reviewed it and met the team. One of the most ambitious, impressive, and bold, exciting examples of how they were envisioning combining the Healthcare.gov concept with their existing services for the poor. Beautiful vision. But new governor's elected, can't touch Obamacare, says, I am not accepting a nickel of Obamacare money, which means this brilliant idea that my staff developed that's good for my people, throw it away. And it was like $60-some-odd million of investment that would have been wonderful to build a better service to their folks, but it had Obamacare on it, and so she turned it away, as did the governor of Kansas. And so 2 of the 7 states just, really politicized what professionals in those states had worked really hard to want to do. And that's disheartening. That part's disheartening. Yeah.
Let me ask you, I know you're an optimist, but do you worry about some paths that things can go in a bad way? People always are worried about security and terrorism and privacy. Yeah. So what's an example of something which may happen, which might undermine the movement towards open data and more innovation, technology enabled?
Healthcare. Yeah. We have a long-standing tradition that both sides of the aisle said if we put more digitization into healthcare and we open up more data and we change the payment models to reward the kinds of products that you need to create people a more prevention-oriented mindset, that's the formula for success. One of the challenges has been our privacy laws across the 50 states are pretty tight and variable. And the challenge is, for the folks who want a simple solution to healthcare information exchange, they're basically saying, avoid the privacy rules, let's just create this one big healthcare cloud, let's put everyone's data in the cloud, and then let's allow so that if you get injured in an emergency room and you're unconscious, that doctor can access the cloud, find your records, and treat you well. I generally don't believe that, even though I understand the value of that, I believe there's too much risk on the privacy front. Healthcare data, your learning records data, these are really sensitive data sets. I'm hopeful that what I'm fearful of is well-intentioned souls who say, let's put this data in the cloud and we'll give the data back to the consumer, but it's still sitting in the cloud without their immediate permission. Maybe not the best. This story doesn't end well. Right. With a data breach or a problem. What I'd rather do is have, kind of in these examples, people think about new architectures. And the one, like we said in the Healthcare.gov, new architecture, to me, empowering patients with digital copies of their own data, going back to Blue Button, and then having doctors do things like ask patients for that Blue Button file are critical to that success.
Yeah, I think having some the next few steps need to be probably cautious still as we go, because there is a risk of basically poisoning the well if we don't do that. Well, great. I think, are there any questions from the group? Please, hey, use the microphone if you would, because there's an audience.
Hello.
Hello.
thanks for coming in and speaking to us and writing the book and working in this really important area.
Thanks for wearing a Sunlight Foundation shirt.
It's total coincidence,
Yes.
actually. It was the only clean shirt I had left today.
Exactly.
So my question is actually just your vision about what the future of democracy looks like in a digital age. And by democracy, I mean it in its purest form. So a group of people coming together and trying to make a decision about some sort of shared issue. And how does that look different in the future? And as a little bit of context, I think it's pretty easy to observe as different industries, as it were, digitize. It's not just about moving stuff online. Like the nature of the services, the nature of the industry has absolutely changed. Just ask anybody who's in journalism or music, et cetera. But when we look at our own democracy in a digital age, basically the way that the processes work are exactly the same. So Congress is operating basically the way it used to. Legislatures are the same. So really, how does this kind of collective decision-making process, i.e. democracy, look different in a digital age once it's sort of disrupted like other industries have been?
One attribute will be frictionless participation. What I mean by that is we're a nation of 300 million people with 3 million government employees. And if we can embrace the spirit that tapping into the 300 million or 297 beyond the 3 is a critical path to solving problems, one important way of doing that is to make it frictionless participation. You might think of that as government by APIs as one technical model, but let me give you a couple of examples because we're starting to see this come into play. In the wake of Wall Street reform, huge political backlash around big banks, big fight in Congress over new regulations to curtail too big to fail and do other things, big political fight. And in the law are two pretty interesting new government roles that had completely different outcomes on what happened on the implementation side. One is the creation of a Consumer Protection Bureau to advocate for the American people to make sure that they're not swindled, if you will, on what my friend, now Senator Elizabeth Warren talks about tricks and traps in the fine print. The other was the establishment of a new rule basically banning proprietary trading inside banks. It's called the Volcker Rule. These are two of the more controversial features of the Dodd-Frank bill. Well, what happened? The Consumer Protection Bureau, because Elizabeth Warren was named as the first sort of launcher of it, we met very early in her appointment, and I sort of asked her the question, would you like to lead the last agency of the 20th century or the first agency born in the 21st? And you know what she said. She's a data queen. So she said, no, I want to be more open, data-driven, et cetera. So I dispatched my deputy to kind of be an interim CTO as they got that agency off the ground. And they launched a crowdsourcing program called Know Before You Owe. The idea was the mortgage disclosure forms are complicated, and there are more than one. And one of the reasons one potential reason why they bought bad mortgages was they didn't fully appreciate the risks that they were assuming. So if we did a better job of informing them through the mortgage forms that they complete what the risks are that they're taking, maybe we could solve the problem or prevent this happening in the future. 30,000 Americans visited knowbeforeyouowe.gov and basically gave commentary and feedback on not one, but two, four, kind of like, am I hot or not? Remember that awkward thing? We created an am I hot or not for mortgage forms. Which form do you like? Which ones don't you like? And give us your feedback as to why. Tons of participation, which meant long before the official rulemaking process even happened, the President of the United States could hold a copy of the American-made form and say that this will be the disclosure form going forward, and then eventually made its way through regulation. In contrast, the Volcker Rule, backdoor, secretive society kind of stuff, technically the American people could have given feedback. It was available on the internet, but like maybe 20 comments were posted on that rule. Now, I don't want to be a cynic, but I think that 30,000 beats 20 on the quality of feedback and the ability to get rules right. And that's a metaphor for all these other aspects of digital service, which is the president had a review of all of the voting technologies and voting problems. Why do we have to wait in line for 6 hours to vote? If I can use my smartphone to check into my flight, which is all the TSA sensitivity, and I can do that. Why can't I check in to vote? So in fact, now there's an open collaboration to try to build those technologies to allow folks to check in to vote, and more will come. And it has a lot more to do with understanding the potential of mobile, cloud, and big data in ways that we hadn't imagined them in our democracy. So I have hope, but I also understand that it's going to take time to get there, and that Dodd-Frank bill is a study in those two different worlds. Other questions? Yes, please.
No, open data is quite vital for creating that innovation economy concept. Do you see open source software having a role in that as well?
Yes, so this is an important question. I'm often asked, should the government make a preference for open source over proprietary code? And actually, I am on the side of folks that say, no, we should not take preference. And the reason is, I don't particularly care about who owns the code base that facilitates social good. I care that they're open interfaces. So let's just take medical records again. I don't necessarily think that every hospital and doctor in America needs to have an open source electronic medical record software package. But what I want is whatever proprietary systems exist, that they should give every patient the ability to view, download, and transfer that medical record file to whomever they want frictionlessly. And that's a difference. Open interface versus open source. Now, there's a moment where open source has its benefits too. The VA, as a government agency and sensitive to its cost structure, is actually doubling down on its open source instance of its Vista software package to help doctors and patients have healthier experiences in the VA. And so you'll see a lot more opportunity to create modules to plug in aspects of new technologies into that environment, and they're going to make the code base open source so anyone can write to it. But that's not something that I'd impose on the society as a whole. That's a judgment that that agency made based on its cost-benefit analysis. And I think that's the right posture generally when thinking about how we solve problems.
So collaboration in the space of building the software, but like just to open data is totally separate kind of thing.
Right. One of the points of history in the book I write is that Herbert Hoover, we're not far from the Hoover Institute, not normally cited as like the greatest president of all time. In fact, quite the opposite. But when he was Secretary of Commerce, issued a vision of the role of government in society, not picking winners and losers, i.e. proprietary versus open source, but to establish a mechanism for pre-competitive R&D, my language. He called it the associative state, where we work together. And that example was that Boeing and Douglas at the time were airline manufacturers at the end of World War I. America wasn't a leader in airline manufacturing. European countries were investing and subsidizing competitors. And we had some fundamental problems. We didn't know how to make airfoils the right way or engine cowlings. So Hoover says that that's pre-competitive R&D. Let's fund it, but open up the intellectual property so that both Boeing's 247 and the DC-3 can compete on what they do on top of that pre-competitive component so that their final product is most certainly proprietary, but it is powered by this asset which was built in part by a collaboration with government. So these are the nuances I try to highlight in the book, at least as to my point of view.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, sir.
So I love the idea of this opendata.gov initiative. Is there an important difference we should understand between a newly created government data set and a data set maybe created through government funding?
Great question. And in the spirit of depression, this is the Aaron Schwartz story, which is to say government funds basic research and development. And as a matter of principle, that knowledge should be freely available. But because of the way publishing works, there's a private intermediary that commercializes and funds all of the necessary work to select the quality articles and to choose which ones are worth publishing and all of that. And so I don't bemoan the fact that we need a part of our economy to filter and to have that editorial role and to produce these documents. But the tension is, how do we open up the data in government-funded work? And I think we struck a happy medium, which is the publishers get to retain a year of rights, at least that's the default setting, and that upon that year coming up, it moves into more of an open model, open access model. I think individual case examples of government-funded research will have different flavors of this, and there's a beautiful debate in our society around the degree to which we want technology transfer and commercialization. In some cases, agencies will do it for free. I write the story of Procter & Gamble that commercialized a modeling and simulation product out of the national labs to help them remove particle dust from the facility. Procter & Gamble was able to repurpose that technology into their diaper manufacturing operation, improving their cash flow about $1 billion over the course of several years. And they've gone back and contributed back to the Department of Energy more modeling and simulation tools that can be made available for others. So it's sort of not a requirement, but a collaboration mindset that created an opportunity. So you're going to see different examples that are there. As long as that there's a path to have that conversation, I think we're in safe hands.
Could I ask one quick follow-up?
Please.
Have you guys thought about ways to solicit feedback about what public data sets people would like to see?
100%. This is the most important part of the journey, because we started it to create the culture change. Of course, you have President Obama saying this is a priority. Day one in office,
Right.
sets this in the midst of the economic crisis, says, I want to open up data, and I'm directing my newly created CTO and my management and budget team to put rules in place to make this happen. When we wrote the rules, one of the key aspects was you have like 45 days to publish 3 high-value data sets. We didn't care what they were. You have to say what you deem to be high value. Now it's a joke, but the CIA published their cafeteria menus.
Which are very important in Google, too.
Very important. Here at Google,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
We
yeah.
got to know which building to go to for the Chinese menu and which one's
critical
Vietnamese
data.
food. Yeah,
Yeah,
of
it's
course.
critical data.
But the point is, we also said that they must open up channels of participation so that people can share feedback in. I give that a C on its execution, because there really hasn't been a lot of demand. What you see is the Sunlight Foundation, accountability organizations that want spending data, lobbyist data, sort of data on the political side of government. They've been the most aggressive in asking, so we published the White House visitor logs in response to that request. You could see everybody who came to visit me at the White House, for example. But for commercial use, there aren't as many people thinking in their mind, I want to build a MOOC that has the ability to access records from the Department of Education or states, and I want to incorporate that into my algorithm to predict which module of the lesson plan should I put in front of which student based on my sense of their profile. I wish more folks said that, because that would open up a new conversation which says, oh, well, we may not be collecting it in that format today, but let's work together to see how we could exercise that muscle. The reason the book to me is so critical, not only for the private sector to understand it, but in the government, is if I work in the Department of Education and my mission objective is that I want every child to have access to a great math education, regardless of their race and their income status, if you came to me and said, I'm going to create a digital tutor for every one of those kids, it would be really helpful if I had access to such and such and such. Boy, that's a different conversation than, can I get a government contract to go build something on your behalf, or can you put a new regulation in place where you have a little bit more of the traditional levers of government. So C, moving to B, maybe A, as more of the ecosystem is aware of the possibilities of new data sets to be made available.
Any other questions? It's one last one. Are you worried about, with the potential change of administration and potentially change of party, who knows what, like what will come, are you worried about some of these advances being undone, or is this inevitable, this movement?
So the reason I'm so hopeful is that this is the one area where both sides seem to agree. And just to give you an example, I served as Virginia Secretary of Technology, which was essentially a cabinet level position akin to what President Obama set up at the White House. A Republican governor of Virginia created the nation's first Secretary of Technology, carried on by a Democratic governor, and again a Republican governor, and again a Democratic governor, and now we have this culture where that's a novel idea that's instantiated into the DNA of what is deemed by the objective measures best managed state in America, according to Governing Magazine. And now at the federal level, opening up data actually got a unanimous vote in the Congress, a unanimous vote. Mark Warner and Eric Cantor, a Republican member of the House, the majority leader of the House, and a Democratic senator, both from Virginia, don't normally see eye to eye and hang out and collaborate. They patroned this Data Act, which in this case opened up financial transactions data in the government in a standardized format, and the president signs this into law. So my hope is whomever is elected president next will build on this foundation, and we'll start to see a new army. I went to the Kennedy School of Government, and I was never trained on the power of open data as a policy lever. I was trained on how do you get Congress to take an action, how do you move the executive branch in regulation, but this idea that there could be ways to collect data and disseminate it in a more friendly manner for entrepreneurs and innovators didn't have a single course on it. So I think as a new army of government employees understand this as a viable path to achieve their mission objective, you're going to see the whole ecosystem respond better. Entrepreneurs see the chance to commercialize and make money. If you make $1 billion selling a startup who closed the educational achievement gap, I would say thank you on behalf of our country. We wouldn't, oh, how dare you make $1 billion doing this? No, make 2. Close the achievement gap. So we will see a new era of entrepreneurs succeed in this. We're going to see more data sets come to life. And I hope we're going to see the political will to treat this as a very important, and if not equal to, but a very important lever in addition to the traditional models of government spending and regulation.
On that very optimistic note, and hopeful as well, let's end there. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, and I wish you all well.